I hope that was fun. Anyone met someone new? That was good. How was it for you guys? Okay. So we are about to begin. Actually, it's a good time to begin. I'd like to introduce to you Benjamin Hersh, who is our first speaker. And guys, I can't really, it's
Such
amazing.
A pleasure.
Unmute yourself, Ben, and everyone else mute yourself. It's amazing to see you again. You were here in Tel Aviv a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed your talk, but this is another talk. You're going to speak about the...
I can't hear you, but
hey, you're muted, Avi.
Yes, now I'm not muted. Okay, good. So basically, Ben, the stage is yours. Please share your screen. Okay.
Are we there?
We're good. Why stories work. Ben, the stage is yours.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you first to Avi and the UX Salon crew for putting this together. It's really inspiring. And thank you to everyone else for joining from around the world, wherever you may be. It's really exciting to have this conversation. I'm Ben. I design things at Dropbox, but before I was in tech, I actually worked in a kitchen for a while. Once upon a time, a friend and I decided to make a pizza together, and Spanish happened to be the only language that we had in common. Now, I was undeterred because I fancied myself pretty fluent, but well, we'll see what happens. I thought that I was in good shape because if I needed something like tomatoes, I could say tomate, and there it would be. And if I wanted cheese, I knew how to say queso, por favor. Where we got into a little bit of trouble is that I forgot the word for flour. So I did the next best thing, and I simply described exactly what I wanted in detail. To make a long story short, this is the first time anyone, as far as I know, created the salt crust pizza. And we probably should have gotten a patent for that. It was very inventive, very new. But unfortunately, one thing that it was not was edible. Not even my dog would touch it. And so I sometimes think about this experience when I prepare a design or some documentation for handoff to an engineer or a product partner. Because often communication is so fragile. It's so easy to miss something crucial and not even know it until it's too late. And so before we go any further, I'm going to do a little pulse check. How much of what you say online do you think your audience understands? And I believe we have a poll queued up, so I can get the signal from you. I want to switch over if we can. Can we get the poll running?
Can't wait to see it.
Can you tell me what is the... Okay, here we go.
So I know that you're a bunch of writers. I did not want to insult your intelligence, so I kept the answers at 50% and above. I figure that's going to be safe. And I didn't put 100% because I figure nothing is ever 100%. And I'll give you 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, 50%. Okay, that is tragic. But a close second is 75% at 48, 45%. Well, that is a little bit disheartening to hear. There was one researcher I came across based out of Cornell who wanted to figure out how much information actually gets across. What this researcher found is that what people expect is 90%. People think that 90% of what they say gets sent to the other person that they're talking to, but what they actually found is 50% is the truth. So looks like about half of you were dead on. I should have known that you'd be a very savvy group. But still, the point stands that there's a significant gap between how clear most people think they are and how clear we really are. Communication is much harder than we tend to initially think. And we're really bad at estimating this. I did some surveys of my own. I was very curious to see what the landscape looked like with my own network. So I shared out some surveys with all of the writers and creative designers and other people on my own network. And I found 90% of the people who responded want to be better at communicating with colleagues, especially people outside of creative disciplines like engineers. And the other 10% I don't think are worth talking to. I asked people, what is the #1 skill that you want to learn? And I found that the first answer is crafting a story by a wide margin. After that is persuasion and effective speaking, and then there's a trail of other miscellaneous answers. But if any of these are things that you've ever wanted to be better at, just know that you are in good company. There's lots of other people who have exactly these same desires they want to cultivate, these desired skills that they want to cultivate. And so this got me thinking, why is this so hard? I asked another series of survey questions asking people, what is it that you struggle with when it comes to this communication? Stakeholders don't understand what I do. This was a very common answer among creative people. I think the fact is that lots of people that we work with just don't have the context, education, disposition to really care about the creative side of things, or they don't just have the tool set to really connect with it. And the burden is often on us to make our work intelligible to other people. Putting information in order. This came up a lot. This goes to the crafting a story point. We are hungry for a recipe, a formula. If only there was some A plus B equals a great story that we knew how to put together. If you look at a lot of other storytelling workshops and resources online, you'll find there's no shortage of people trying to articulate what these stories, recipes, archetypes are. And holding my audience's interest. I think this one speaks for itself. And now you might be wondering, what kind of person runs surveys for fun? Well, I'm Ben. I mentioned before I work at Dropbox, where I'm a product designer, and I love stories. Please raise your hand if you use Dropbox, and keep them up. I'm going to count. I'm kidding, of course. I can't see any of you, maybe 5 of you. But for those of you who didn't raise your hand, or if you did just to humor me, Dropbox is a tool built for sharing and collaboration, and it happens to have a lot of really incredible creative storytellers working there. In my past, I've spent a lot of time around the publishing industry, working at places like Medium and Byliner, which I know that you haven't heard of, but they won a Pulitzer Prize, and that's worth something, even in this dismal day and age. And I've had the remarkable privilege of working with some of the great writers and editors in the world, and these collaborations have taught me a profound curiosity about the role of language and storytelling in the work that we do. I became absolutely fascinated by these questions. And when COVID struck, when we had to shelter in place, I realized that all of us are spending our time around these digital campfires, telling each other stories like I'm doing right now with you. This is the new way that we communicate, and it calls on these ancient skills, and I wanted to understand this better. I started to dig around and do some research, and I wanted to understand things as holistically as I can. So I started doing surveys, I started interviewing the best creative storytellers I knew. And to that point, let's jump into another survey. This is going to be a quick calibration. What commercials get the highest ratings? I'm going to put this out to you as another poll, and I want to see how good your intuitions are for what makes for a great commercial. The possibilities are fast cars, cute animals, or beautiful people. I'll give you 10 more seconds again. I know this one's tough. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, beautiful people, cute animals at 46%. Seems like no one likes fast cars. I understand we all have our tastes. Fair enough. Well, thank you for responding in a timely way. Turns out that you're all right, believe it or not. There's one researcher based out of Johns Hopkins who looked at 110 Super Bowl commercials and had audiences rate them to understand what kind of content really gets people to understand a commercial's value, what kind of content resonates most in a commercial. And what they found is that the only thing that matters is that it tells a story, period, full stop. The content does not matter one bit. What does matter is that it has a character and it takes you along that person's journey. Everything else is noise. Stories are magic. There's something about them that is just really remarkable at capturing our attention and holding our interest. And, you know, this is unfortunately what most of the communication I do looks like. I communicate a lot in bullet points. I see this with everyone I work with. Here's just a description of my dog, as if I was creating a spec for my dog to hand off to an engineer. My dog likes human food. My dog was adopted. My dog is named Gordon Ramsay. My dog hides under the furniture. My dog is a jerk sometimes. It's clear enough, but just think about how much better the same exact content resonates when it's a story presented as if I'm just talking to you across the table. When I got my dog, he hid under the table and refused to come out until I gave him my omelet. He's a picky eater and kind of a jerk, so I named him Gordon Ramsay. Stories are magic. There's something going on here that just works. Researchers and psychologists have found that the exact same information, when it's presented like this as a little story, is much easier for us to read. We read it twice as fast as exactly the same expository text, and we remember it better for longer. What's going on? I became preoccupied with this question. Why do stories work? I wanted to better understand this, and so I went out, I did a lot of research, I did some digging. Eventually, after boiling through a giant pile of books, I found an answer that, at least for me, felt like it was able to transform my perspective and show me a way towards a better way of relating to communication and storytelling. And it's my pleasure to share what I learned with you. Let me introduce you to Paul Zak. Paul Zak is a neuroscientist at Claremont Graduate University. He grew up in a conservative household that was very Catholic, and he grew up completely surrounded by ideas about guilt and sin, morality, right and wrong. And Paul grew up wanting to better understand what these words meant. So he became a neuroscientist, and he spent his career studying the foundations of morality in the human brain. After many years, he eventually found something that you might have heard of. It's the chemical oxytocin. He has it in a syringe right here that he's shooting out onto the stage. Oxytocin is perfectly harmless. It's something that flushes your brain in brief moments, and it's something that every mammal has. It is the warm-blooded hormone that makes us love each other and feel connected. It's what you feel when you reach out and you pet a friendly dog, and guess what? The dog also feels it. It's that feeling of your trust going up, your barriers, the things that you shield yourself from the world with coming down a little bit and giving yourself an opening to connect. It's what you feel during moments of intimate touch with someone that you care about. And it's something that mothers get a huge jolt of during childbirth and when connecting with their infants. It is the chemical that is responsible for social bonds and holding us together as a society. And here's where it gets interesting for me. After many years, Paul Zak found that not only do you get a rush of oxytocin in all of these intimate moments, you also get it when you listen to a story. And I'm going to give a little dramatic pause here to let that sink in. This completely blew my mind when I made the connection that on a physiological level, on a neurochemical level, stories are touch. We spend so much time thinking about the structure, the formula of a story. What are the ingredients that you need to go into it? But on a basic level, stories are touch. And I know that neurophysiology is really abstract, so let's take this in a totally different direction for just a moment. Let me introduce you now to the Aita people. This is a community of people that's been living in the Luzon Island of the Philippines for about 35,000 years. A hunter-gatherer society that's been passing its culture along generation by generation through the art of storytelling. And anthropologists have traveled from around the world to visit and understand them. Recently, someone came from London and started asking people to identify the best storytellers in their community. Then they started to look for patterns, and here's one fascinating thing that they found. Great storytellers have more children. So first of all, if you needed a good reason to be a good storyteller, there's one. But it also brings new meaning to this idea that stories are touch. And they found that the more gifted storytellers there are in a community, the kinder people are to each other. So if there's a lot of great storytellers and you give someone food, that person is more likely to share that food with other people around them. Stories are the glue that holds communities together and helps people work together and be kind. Stories are touch. And This also gave me a tool to understand some of the results from my own surveys when I discovered this research. I saw that when I'd ask people what makes them respond to a storyteller, I got predominantly answers like this: draws me in through voice, tone, body language, humor, personality, engaging personality, warmth, humility, and authenticity. This was a big one. And so even though when you ask people, what are the things you want to be better at? You get answers like putting information in order. When you ask people, do I know to identify what they already know makes a story really work? It comes down to these human elements. What do the experts say? Here's a couple excerpts from conversations I had with great storytellers across the creative world. Enrique Allen, founder of Designer Fund. He spends his life listening to designers pitching their stories to get money. His take is that I cannot emphasize warmth enough. Your story is what you're cooking in the pot, but what's the fire warming it? I couldn't put it better. And Vitaly Freeman of Smashing Magazine, who's probably written and read more stories about design and technology than any other human being on the entire planet, said it's not about hooking someone with a story and keeping them captivated. It's about being in the same room. When he says something like that, I'm inclined to believe him. And so the next question is how? What does it take to harness this magic of storytelling in a real way? Well, Dr. Paul Zak spent years doing research and understanding what it takes to make a story work on this level. What he found is that there's two conditions it needs to follow. It needs to, one, capture and hold attention, and two, transport your audience. I think number one is clear enough what that means, but number two is worth digging into a little bit more. Transportation is that magic that happens when you're reading a book and the words disappear from in front of you and you find yourself immersed in the world that it's presenting. It's what happens when you let down your guard and the barriers between you and the person telling the story start to disappear because you trust them enough to guide you somewhere. And the brain science of this is also fascinating. It was for a long time believed that when you heard a story that your language area right here would be going off. And what studies with fMRI, functioning magnetic imaging, brain scanners have revealed more recently is that it's actually the entire brain that lights up when you hear a story. Your auditory cortex goes off when you listen to voices in your head. Your visual cortex goes off when you start seeing things in your mind's eye. We are totally involved in a story. And not only that, but the activation that we get flows to us from the person who's telling the story. So if I were to look out the window and tell you about how the trees are waving back and forth in the wind, that's a pattern from my brain that got transported into yours, and we are currently mirroring each other. And I know this seems really highfalutin and maybe needlessly abstract because we're looking at a picture of brains, but I assure you it is as simple as saying that this morning I had a peach that was so ripe it melted in my mouth. All it takes is a vivid description and an image helps. And right now, you, people around the world, are feeling this sensation of a peach in your mouth that I've experienced. Stories are touch. I went to some great designers at Dropbox to understand their strategies for portfolio presentation. Bill Sweeney said, I start with the final design and work backwards. I want to sear the design into their minds from the beginning. Billy here understands the value of transporting your audience and inviting them into the world that you're building through a vivid experience. And this is what it takes to pull someone in. Iris Lynn, also at Dropbox, had a very different take, but I think fundamentally is on to the same insight. If your audience understands the human problem, that's what's on their mind when they see your work. They're looking for resolution, so they pay attention. So what Iris does is when she's sharing a story, she'll start with the human side. It will be, Joe is driving around in an Uber or Lyft until 2 a.m. every night because he needs to save up to put food on his family's table. All of a sudden, you care about this person. You have a scenario in your mind that you can imagine, a character you can relate to, and you allow yourself to be transported for the rest of the presentation about this design work. Jake Knapp, the author of the best-selling book Sprint, told me, don't use jargon that hides the meaning. Instead of saying KPI, that's key performance indicator, spell things out. Who, what, where. Make your language forceful and compelling. This is what it takes to pull someone into a story and transport them to where you want to go. So let's talk about how to in more concrete terms. I'm going to share a story from my own experience, something that this research has helped me understand in a new light. And I think hopefully there will be some insight for you as well. Let me introduce you now to John and Ken. John and Ken are both world-renowned philosophers. People travel from all over the world to study with them. People write books about them. People obsess about them. John is on the left, and he has a mind like a laser beam. He is sharp and focused. Ken, on the right, is John's opposite in many ways. He is broad-minded and expansive. John wrote the 20th century's landmark book on the word I. Ken taught a class called The Art of Living, where he would lie down on the floor to remind his students that you too will die one day. And he would scream, "What am I to do?" And so John and Ken saw the world in very different ways, and they loved to argue. They spent years arguing. They would argue about the meaning of life and the meaning of philosophy. They would argue about the color of the sky, until one day they found one thing that they could agree on, which is that they wanted to put together a radio show. And the premise of the show would be John and Ken would argue live on air for an hour every single week. And each week they would take a different topic of interest and have a special guest who could provide insight about that topic. So here they are with Edward Snowden. This was shortly after he fled to Russia. This was very, I think, surreal to have John and Ken having this critical discussion about the ethics of what Snowden had done with him in the room. And it takes more, though, than just having these incredible guests and two opposing points of view to make good radio. This by itself would be total insanity. So what they need is a story. There needs to be a beginning, something to make any topic accessible for an audience that might not have a background there, something that makes data ethics or the structure of the cosmos accessible to normal people like us. And then you need to be able to ratchet up the tension. You need opposing points of view. You need something to explore. You need some way of holding attention over time. And then you need a resolution, something that lets the audience step away, feeling satisfied enough that they're going to come back the next week. And because this is radio, you're competing with the entire world for someone's attention. If your audience is driving, you're competing with the road in front of them. You're competing with the person sitting to their side. You're competing with the pop music one station over. And you know what? That's exactly the situation we find ourselves in right now. You could be browsing Reddit for all I know, and there's nothing that I can do about it except implore you to please pay attention to me. And this is fundamentally the challenge that we all face when we try to explain creative work in a remote context. It's so abstract. It's like explaining philosophy. You need some sort of story. You need some sort of structure to make it simple and intelligible and engaging. And here's where I come in. John and Ken hired me many years ago to help them write the stories for each episode. I stayed with them for about 4 years and helped produce about 100 episodes. So I got a lot of practice doing this. I got a lot of repetitions, and I started to find a process for how to create a story out of this complete chaos. And here's my process. It's pretty simple. I would talk it out. So recognizing that you have some formula that you need to fill out, you have a recipe. What I found is that you don't ever start with the recipe. What you start with is reaching out to other people, talking to experts, people with strong opinions, people with no opinions. Because you start to understand what are the questions that make this interesting? What are the points of view that people naturally take? And what are the points of view that they settle into once they start having a conversation about it? Each time you do this, you start paying attention to what's unclear when you talk about this with someone. What are the points of interest? What are the things you can skip over? And before you know it, the story that you want to tell is right in front of you. It just emerges naturally from the process of engaging with other people and making contact. And if you were to try to tell a story by filling out some sort of a formula, that's something like learning how to dance by looking at someone's footprints in the snow. I can tell you that's the wrong way to do it. The point is that what I discovered is that the story is something that emerges on its own when you reach out and you make it about connecting with other people around you. And if there's only one thing that you walk away from this conversation with, I hope it's this. Stories are touch. Thank you.
Okay, wow. So everyone, give it a big clap. Thank you.
Very nice story.
You can see, oh yeah, there's icons of claps. You see it, Benjamin? Thank you all. That was really interesting. Thank you. You know, by the way, Vitaly is watching us as well right now, and he's sending a shout out It's nice to be quoted. Vitaly, can you hear us as well, or is he gone? Nope. Okay. So, but he was watching until a few minutes ago. So, Nora, where are you?
Yes, I'm right here.
All right. Let me start the discussion.
Great. Benjamin, thank you so much. It was, the comments were blowing up during your presentation, and you are an excellent storyteller about storytelling. Everybody really enjoyed it. And I think what was the most amazing thing is the different opinions about storytelling when it comes to UX writing specifically. And I wonder if you can actually give us like in a very real example from Dropbox about when you're working with a UX writer, how storytelling comes into play, like something very concrete. The reason I ask is often storytelling feels something that's more related to emotive text. Some storytelling that targets the frontal cortex, as you mentioned earlier. So can you talk to us about how you actually do it at Dropbox?
Sure. One trick that I call it a trick. It's really the opposite of a trick. One habit that I really enjoy is to speak interfaces out loud and make it like, I think users already receive it like a conversation. You hear it in your mind's ear when you see text in front of you. I think I've had a lot of good luck just talking things out, reading it out loud like a script. So printing out an interface, holding it in front of you, and just saying the words out loud and getting a feel for what that lands like, and turning it literally into a conversation. There's one example that I gave in my talk last year from Medium where we ended up, we had a modal that was interrupting readers, and it was very disruptive because we were saying, while you're in the middle of the story, it would show up and it would say like, hey, while you're reading this, we would love it if you signed up and created an account. And what we started to feel as we were reading this out loud, I was working with other writers and with a researcher, is that the sort of implicit dialogue of this conversation was really disrespectful to the reader because someone is in the middle of the story, they don't want to be interrupted. And we ended up testing in the language pardon the interruption, and it completely changed the flavor of the interaction. Our metrics did well. We got a lot of people really enthusiastic about that on Twitter, which I never thought I would see from an interrupting modal. I think that's sort of the way I tend to approach it, trying to pull these decisions into a much more conversational space and away from, you know, living in a spreadsheet, which tends to be where they actually live when we're putting together documentation.
That's amazing. What do you think people misunderstand about storytelling? What do you think people sometimes make mistakes or how they misrepresent storytelling, particularly within an interface?
I mean, I certainly feel I can speak to my own misunderstandings over the years. I think for a long time, I had a much more technical attitude about it than what it really called for. I was someone who would think about what is the arc, what are the beats that we're hitting, do we have an intro, do we set the context, do we set the table in the right way? And I'd say that my attitude about it was just a little bit wrong. And one of the things that I've learned recently through putting this together is that really that stuff tends to emerge when you approach it much more organically. And, you know, it's not rocket science, it's sort of the opposite. It's embracing the very simple human aspect of what you're doing and trusting that the intuitions that you've been building your entire life about how to talk and connect with people are going to help you connect with people through a digital interface. There's like no magic above what it takes to engage with someone that you already know how to do.
Very cool. I'm curious to see about, you know, you've been in this business for a few years, working as a designer and product designer. How have you seen the emergence of UX writing come into what you've been doing? And how long did it take you to figure out how to work well with a UX writer?
This is a big question. I realized that I had been doing this kind of work since the very beginning when I started around 2010. I had always been fascinated with words and language and paid special attention. I used to be a writing tutor, and it's always been very top of mind for me. And it wasn't until the last few years that I heard the phrase UX writing, and I realized that there is now a word for this thing that myself and so many other designers and writers had already been doing for a long time. As far as working with other people, I try to just sort of think about it holistically as any other design element. I think the natural inclination at a lot of organizations is for writing to come in as a final layer once a lot of other pieces has been set. And that's unfortunate because the words are really, I think, like the core of what the design is, because that's what the user sees that tells them what an action is, what they can do. It sets expectations for what's possible in the world of your product. Language is so important. I don't need to convince you, you're writers. But I think putting a name on it has helped a lot. It's helped it get recognition and have more incorporation into the process. And, you know, learning how to work with writers, I feel like, you know, all I can say that I do is I try to respect that writing is as every much a part of the craft of design as animation or you know, the technical development. It's just a crucial ingredient that needs to come in the right places and be honored and given the space to, you know, to reach its potential.
Okay.
And what do you think about the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
We have a question for one more question. So a moment. Go ahead. Sorry to distract you.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, sorry, no problem. Do you think there's any chance that we're vastly approaching a stage where storytelling is over with the emergence of like NLP and AI technology?
I mean, I don't know how that would make storytelling over at all. I'd be curious to see what situation makes storytelling obsolete. I feel like, if anything, the trend I've seen is that storytelling is more and more important as, for example, this is the way that we can communicate, and we have to rely on our words or written documentations or PowerPoints. We no longer have the ability to tap someone on the shoulder and nudge them until we get what we want out of them. We have to persuade people and hook them and you know, convince people to see the world the same way that we see it. So the trend I see is that storytelling is only becoming more present in the kinds of remote work that we're doing now.
I agree.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Ben. Wow, it was
my pleasure.
Really good to hear you. And again, if you guys want to continue the discussion, please join the Slack group, add your questions there, and Ben will try to answer it later. And also, I'd like to see more engagement on social media. If you guys hashtag words2020, I will repost you. And there's also an amazing, by the way, Ben, you should check the Google Doc, the collaborative Google Doc. People are writing their notes. It's amazing. And it's really cool to see that in development. So check that out. Okay, moving on, we have Dave Barton. Dave, where you are?
I'm right here. How you doing?
Hey, Dave. Good to see you.
Thank
Dave,
you.
Share your screen, and you will speak about writing with an alarming intimacy, which I'm particularly looking forward to.
Very alarming, very intimate. Let me just... I'm just going to apologize first of all because I've got this lovely, you know, authentic kind of background that I have here, which is, you know, real rather than manufactured. I couldn't actually, I wanted to have the nice fancy background that said Words 2020 and looked blue and cool and stuff, but for some reason my Mac OS is a bit rubbish, to put it bluntly.
We forgive
but there
you.
we go. So we shall persevere. We shall persevere, and I will persevere with a presentation right now. So tell me when you can see the goods, and I will see my home screen. See my
okay, we can see it.
An arm around the shoulder, writing with an alarming intimacy. We're good to go.